My name is Margaret Hale. I'm 66 years old, and last Saturday I wore a navy blue dress I hadn't taken out in years. I ironed it the night before, hung it carefully on the door, and stared at it for an hour. It was the dress I always imagined I'd wear when my son got married. Not to impress anyone, just to feel like I belonged. That morning, I curled my hair the way my late husband used to like it. I put on the pearl earrings he gave me before he passed. I even wore perfume lavender, the same scent I used to dab behind my ears when James was little, so he'd say, "You smell like bedtime, Mommy." I stood in front of the mirror, took a breath, and whispered to myself, "You're the mother of the groom. This is your moment too." But by 3:00 p.m., I was sitting alone, next to a restroom. Not the family table, not near the cake, not even close to the dance floor. I was placed directly beside the door labeled Women, and just above my seat was a buzzing fluorescent light that flickered like it was mocking me. I thought it was a mistake at first, so I asked the young usher, a boy who barely looked 20, if I was reading the seating card wrong. He looked at the card, then looked at me, then back down at the card. "No, Mrs. Hale. This is correct." Correct. I stood there gripping my little handbag with both hands. My son Evan hadn't seen me yet. He was still upstairs getting ready. But she had the bride, my new daughter-in-law Clarissa. She walked past me with her veil pinned perfectly and whispered, "I asked the planner to place you there. It's better for the pictures." Then she smiled, as if she had just done me a favor. I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard her right. But she was already gone, laughing with her bridesmaids. I looked back at my chair, positioned directly beside a trash bin labeled Maintenance Use Only. That's when I realized this wasn't a mistake. This was placement. This was intentional. They didn't want me in the pictures. They didn't want me to be part of the memory. I wasn't the elegant mother of the groom. I was… what? An afterthought. An inconvenience. No, I was the woman who raised him alone after his father died in a car accident. I was the woman who worked 3 jobs to pay for his private school. The one who sat in every parent-teacher conference alone. Who missed meals so he'd never miss a soccer tournament. But none of that mattered today, because someone else got to decide where I sat. And apparently that was next to the restroom. I watched other guests arrive. Laughter echoed through the decorated hall. A waiter smiled at me politely and offered sparkling water. I said thank you, even though my throat was dry for another reason entirely. I tried to keep my face composed, dignified, invisible. But something shifted inside me. Not anger, not sadness. Resolve. If they didn't want me in the picture, they'd soon realize the picture was never complete without me. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I just sat quietly and began remembering everything they had forgotten. If this story already feels personal to you, subscribe now, because Margaret's story has only just begun. The photos left her out, but the truth will put her back in the frame. I wasn't always invisible. Once upon a time, Evan would grip my hand so tightly I thought I'd never breathe without him near me. When James, his father, died in that accident, Evan was just 6. He didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't speak. He just stared at the wooden box that held everything we were supposed to grow old around. That night, I crawled into bed beside him. I didn't sleep. Neither did he. He whispered, "Mom, if I sleep, will Dad still be gone when I wake up?" I said, "Yes, baby, but I'll still be here." And I took a job cleaning offices from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. Then taught at the community college until 3, then worked at the library from 4 to 8. Dinner was often grilled cheese, sometimes just oatmeal. But I made sure his school shoes never had holes. I made sure he had birthday cakes, even if they were made from pancake mix and jelly. When he got older and kids at school laughed at his second-hand uniform, I remember kneeling down, fixing his collar, and saying, "Someday you'll wear a suit that fits, because your mother wore clothes that didn't." He used to tell me he'd buy me a house with a garden one day, that I'd never have to work again, that I was his forever date to every school event until he got married. Well, I made it to the wedding, but not to the garden. I remember the day Clarissa entered the picture. She was charming, poised, polished in a way that smelled of generational wealth and catered childhoods. She called me ma'am, not Margaret, not Mom. Just ma'am. It was respectful, but it wasn't warm. Still, I tried. I invited her to tea, baked her Evan's favorite biscuits, even offered her my mother's brooch to wear at the engagement party. She left it on the sink. No explanation. No thanks. Just a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Evan started to change too, not dramatically, just subtly. He laughed less with me, shared fewer things, took longer to call back. One day I asked if I could see the wedding planning binder. He said, "Oh, Clarissa has it all under control. You don't need to worry, Mom." I smiled. But inside, I felt the first layer of dust settle over me. The truth is, I didn't want control. I just wanted a chair near the aisle, a line in the toast, a photograph where I wasn't hidden behind a fern or cropped from the edge. I wasn't asking to be celebrated, just seen. Now, sitting there beside the restroom, I realized something devastating. Everything I had built, every sacrifice, had led me to a seat no one wanted. And still, I wasn't angry. Because deep inside, I remembered they could forget the wedding invitation, but they couldn't erase the nights I walked miles home to save bus fare for Evan's art supplies. They couldn't unwrite the stories I whispered beside his bed to chase away his nightmares. They couldn't rewrite what I knew, and what I knew was about to matter more than they imagined. A week before the wedding, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. No handwritten address, no call beforehand, just a printed label. To Mem. Margaret Hale, as if I were a distant relative or a retired librarian someone forgot to remove from the list. I turned the envelope over slowly. There was no return name, only the logo of some designer stationery brand I didn't recognize. My heart fluttered. Maybe this was it? The formal gesture, a kind note tucked inside, a handwritten message from Evan apologizing for being busy lately, for not letting me help choose the music, the flowers, or even the seating chart. I sat down at my kitchen table. The sunlight was gentle that morning, slanting through the curtain in golden threads. I opened the envelope with careful fingers, trying not to tear the flap. Inside was a trifold invitation printed in gold foil. Evan Daniel Hale and Clarissa Monroe request the honor of your presence. The rest was as expected. Date, time, location. No RSVP card. Just a QR code on the back. I looked again, blinking. No, dear Mom. No, I can't wait to see you there. No photo of them together tucked inside. Just a generic invitation like one would send to an old coworker. I placed it gently on the table, and then I sat there, in complete silence, for almost 20 minutes. I couldn't explain why, but something about the formality stung deeper than I expected. It wasn't cold. It was sterile, efficient, designed to keep me at a distance while still checking the box that said, "Invite, mother of groom." I told myself not to read too much into it. "They're just overwhelmed," I whispered aloud to no one. "Clarissa probably handled the invites. She's detail-oriented, polished." But a small voice inside me asked, "Why weren't you there when they made these decisions?" I had never missed a decision in Evan's life. From which blanket to buy when he had the flu, to which college essay he should send to Brown versus Northwestern. I was always there, but now suddenly I was not. A few days later, I got a call from Aunt Lillian, Evan's great-aunt on his father's side. We'd never been close, but we exchanged Christmas cards every year. "Margaret," she said, her voice dry and curious, "I got my wedding invitation yesterday. I just assumed I'd be seated near you." I hesitated. I'm not sure, Lillian. I haven't seen the seating chart." She clicked her tongue. "Well, I'm bringing my friend Dolores. We'll find our way. Clarissa's people are handling everything, I suppose." Her friend Dolores, who had met Evan maybe twice, getting a prime table. And I, the woman who raised him, hadn't even been told where to sit. I stared at the invite again that evening, this time with a different kind of ache. Not sadness, not confusion. Foreshadowing. Something wasn't right. The day before the wedding, Evan finally called. His voice was rushed, light rehearsed. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to check if you got the invite." "I did," I said. "It was very formal." He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, Clarissa wanted everything to look uniform. You know how she is. Modern, clean." I smiled thinly, though he couldn't see me. "Yes, very clean." He paused. "Mom, I hope you don't mind where you're seated." It's just, the planner had strict rules and Clarissa's family is really large. My stomach sank. So it had already been decided. And he already knew. I swallowed. Of course, Evan. As long as I'm there to see you happy, that's what matters. Thanks, Mom, he said, relieved. You're the best. He hung up without asking how I was doing, without asking if I needed a ride, or who I'd be coming with. It was like I was a guest, not a mother, not his mother. That night, I looked through old photo albums. I found the picture of Evan in his little tuxedo for a school play. He had stood on a cardboard stage and called out, "Mom, take a picture. I want to remember this forever." I did. I still had the print, curled at the edges, now faded slightly. But there he was, grinning, wide arms open, looking right at me. Now he was about to stand on another stage. And this time he didn't want me in the frame. Little did he know, there was one part of the story he and Clarissa had completely forgotten. A detail buried beneath all their careful planning. A paper signed years ago. A promise made before money. Before titles. Before designer invitations and floral centerpieces. And that one forgotten promise would soon rewrite everything. I arrived 15 minutes early. The church was a grand old thing, all stained glass and ivy-draped pillars, the kind of place you see in bridal magazines with names like Timeless Elegance and Weddings of Distinction. But as I stepped out of the cab, I felt like I had shown up at someone else's celebration. No one was waiting for me. There was no usher with a warm smile, no bridesmaid with a checklist that included my name, just a man in a black suit holding a clipboard who asked, "Are you with the Monroe family or the Hale family?" I blinked. "I'm the groom's mother." He looked again at his clipboard, then said, "Oh, you're Margaret. Yes, you're down here near the reception hall. Please follow the signs to your seat." Down here. I followed the arrows printed in curling gold font, past hydrangea arrangements the size of bicycles, past the rows of guests laughing, hugging, adjusting their silk ties. I caught glimpses of people I didn't recognize. Clarissa's aunts, no doubt elegant, tall, perfumed in expensive, invisible ways. One of them glanced at me, then leaned to the woman beside her and whispered something. They both looked, then turned away. I passed a mirror in the corridor and paused. I looked. Fine. My navy dress was simple but pressed. My hair was pulled back neatly. My pearls still gleamed softly against my skin. But standing there under fluorescent light, I saw what they saw. Age. Modesty. A woman who didn't fit into this curated tableau of modern luxury. The ceremony hadn't started yet. I made my way to the seating area. A young girl in a headset showed me to my chair, the one beside the restroom door. She smiled politely and gestured like she was seating a school teacher at a parent-teacher night. No special welcome. No, we're so glad you're here. Just a folded name card and a chair next to the soft hiss of automatic plumbing. Across the room, I saw Clarissa's mother surrounded by people. She wore a champagne-colored gown and had a crystal brooch pinned over her heart like a battle medal. She laughed easily. Confidently, someone leaned into her ear and whispered something. She glanced in my direction, smiled faintly, and whispered back. A few minutes later, I overheard a young woman behind me, maybe a cousin or friend, murmur to her seatmate, "Is that the groom's mom? I thought she'd be, I don't know, more elegant." And the reply, "Clarissa said she used to be a teacher. Public school." They both giggled. I didn't turn around. I just stared ahead, hands folded in my lap. I'd been invisible for months, but now for the first time I wasn't invisible. I was a spectacle, a curiosity, a poorly cropped figure in an otherwise glossy scene. Suddenly the music started. The soft strains of a cello filled the air. Guests turned their heads, excitement rising like a tide. The bridal procession began. I leaned slightly forward, hoping for one glimpse of Evan before he took his place. My son, my only child. And then, through the crowd, I saw him. He looked radiant. Strong jaw, perfect tuxedo, eyes focused ahead. Clarissa's hand on his arm. They walked together slowly like royalty. And for a moment, just a single flicker. His eyes swept the crowd and landed on me. We locked eyes. I smiled. But he didn't. He looked away. Quickly, as if ashamed, or unsure of what to do. And in that moment, it felt like the most painful truth I had ever known. He was more afraid of disrupting the image than of dishonoring the woman who made him possible. The ceremony went on. They exchanged vows. The crowd laughed at the officiant's jokes. Clarissa cried beautiful tears. They kissed. Applause erupted, and I clapped too, politely, quietly, as if I was witnessing someone else's child walk into a life I would never be welcome in. After the ceremony, while guests filtered toward the reception, I stood for a moment watching everyone hug and pose for photos. No one came to me. I waited, smiling, nodding politely, like a statue placed there for atmosphere. A bridesmaid nearly bumped into me and said, "Oh, I didn't see you there. You blend in so well." I didn't answer, because I had heard something else. A whisper carried from the bridal suite earlier, from Clarissa herself. "Just make sure she's not in the front row and definitely not in the photos near the cake. She'll ruin the aesthetic." Ruin the aesthetic. I wasn't even a person to her. Just visual clutter. But I didn't leave, because Clarissa might have had the photos. She might have had the clipboard, the designer gown. But I had something else. Something that wasn't planned into their timeline. Something that had nothing to do with aesthetics. I had a truth, and I had waited long enough. The reception hall shimmered like a dream carefully crafted by a Pinterest board. Golden candlelight flickered on every table. Crystal glasses clinked gently as servers in black gloves poured champagne with quiet precision. I stood at the edge of it all, momentarily unsure where to go. There was no place card for me on the main tables. A distant cousin gestured vaguely toward the back, a round table near the sound booth. I made my way there, my heels soft on the polished wooden floor, my presence even softer. Once seated, I looked around. Clarissa's side was everywhere. Her college friends, her distant uncles, even a woman she referred to as her spiritual nutritionist. They laughed easily. Toast after toast flowed in their direction. On Evan's side, few familiar faces remained. Most of his childhood friends had moved away, married off, or fallen out of touch. The ones who did attend barely looked in my direction. At my table were people I didn't know. A quiet elderly man who said he worked with Clarissa's father, a woman who worked in their family's law firm, and a young man who whispered to his date, "I think she's the groom's mom." I sipped my water slowly. Then came the moment I dreaded. The cake presentation. It was grand. A 5-tier tower of white and rose gold adorned with edible pearls and delicate sugar flowers. A server wheeled it in while a violinist played a custom arrangement of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Guests gasped. Phones were raised. Lights dimmed. A spotlight lit the cake like it were royalty. Then came the announcement from the MC. "Ladies and gentlemen, this cake is more than dessert. It's a symbol. It represents love, legacy, and family. Today, it is a gift from the bride's parents, handcrafted in Paris, flown in yesterday, and made in honor of the union between two beautiful souls." I waited for the next sentence. Something like, "And in memory of the groom's late father and the love of his mother, Margaret Hale, who raised him." But there was nothing. Just applause. Just flashing lights. And Clarissa posing beside the cake, one arm looped into Evan's, the other holding a golden cake knife. I watched stomach tight as they cut the first slice. They fed each other with smiles wide enough to make magazines jealous. And in the background, not the photos, just the room. I sat, still, small, absent in everything but body. A distant relative of mine, Aunt Ruth, approached. She patted my hand gently. "Are you all right, Margaret?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine." She sat beside me. "It's strange," she whispered. "I noticed Evan didn't mention you in the speech earlier. Thought maybe he'd say something about how hard you worked or how proud his father would be." I stared at the centerpiece. Lilies and eucalyptus, fragrant, expensive, and lifeless. "Yes," I said. "I noticed too." Later, as guests began to dance, I walked toward the side table where the extra slices of cake were being served. I didn't want to eat it. I just needed to see it. A small part of me hoped maybe they'd written something on it, even a simple inscription, "To Evan and Clarissa from Mom." But no. The inscription read, "Forever starts here. Monroe Wedding Est, 2025. Monroe, her name, her family. There was no Hale in it, no trace of Evan's roots, no trace of the woman who had taught him how to write his name. I turned away, bile rising in my throat. Clarissa was nearby, posing again for photos. Her voice, crisp and commanding, carried across the floor. Make sure the angle's good. I don't want the restroom door in the background. And keep that chair clear, the one Evan's mom used earlier. It looks cluttered. That chair, my chair, a prop in her eyes, something to be cleared. At that moment, something cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a silent fissure in the foundation of a mother's restraint. I walked quietly to the restroom hallway where my purse and coat waited, took a deep breath, and opened the worn leather folder I had brought with me, hidden all day beneath my wrap. Inside it, a document Evan had signed 6 years ago, a document he had forgotten, a power of attorney, an addendum to his inheritance, and an irrevocable clause that Clarissa and her meticulously planned empire of image hadn't seen. But they would, soon. I sat on the upholstered bench outside the restroom, clutching the worn leather folder against my chest. The laughter from the reception faded behind the soft hum of a hallway vent. There was a strange peace in that moment, like the quiet before a thunderstorm finally breaks. I opened the folder again, careful not to crease the yellowing edges. Inside was a power of attorney Evan had signed when he was 22. He'd just graduated college and was heading to Europe for a year with an artist residency. He was young, bright-eyed, and terrified of foreign hospitals and paperwork. He said, "Mom, I trust you with everything. You've always been the one who keeps my world from falling apart." I remember smiling, placing a hand over his heart and replying, "Then make it legal." He had. Right there at the kitchen table with a notary friend from the college and a mug of cold cocoa beside us. The clause in question, the one no one had thought to revoke, was tucked inside an addendum. A stipulation regarding any future joint assets under Evan's name exceeding $250,000 in value, including but not limited to real estate joint accounts and trust funds created in his name or derived from inherited property. The Monroe Wedding Trust fell squarely into that category. I knew because I had helped his late father set it up when Evan was still in grade school, just in case. A safety net for his future marriage. A gesture of love from a father he barely remembered. And now that trust had been used to fund a wedding that erased me from every photo. I placed the papers back into the folder, ran my fingers slowly across the embossed initials on the cover, E.H. Evan Hale, my son. And now, whether he remembered it or not, I still had the legal authority to freeze access to certain funds. Clarissa may have married into a name, but she hadn't married out of consequence. I wasn't planning to use it. Not out of revenge. Not yet. But I needed a reminder that I wasn't powerless. That my life, my years of sacrifice, hadn't all been for someone else to inherit and rewrite. The hallway door opened. Voices filtered through. I tucked the folder back into my purse just as Clarissa's mother stepped into the corridor. She didn't see me at first. She was on the phone. No, it was perfect. Everything except. You know her. A pause. Well, yes, Evan's mother. The teacher. She looked provincial. Thank God she wasn't in too many photos. Another pause. Honestly, Clarissa's been so gracious. I told her she should just put her in a quiet nursing home after the honeymoon. It'll make things easier when the baby comes. My stomach twisted. Baby? My heart caught in my throat. They hadn't told me. No one had. She turned startled when she finally noticed me. "Oh, Margaret. Didn't see you there." "I'm sure," I said softly. She smiled, unbothered. "I was just stepping out for some fresh air. You know how overwhelming these events can be." I nodded slowly. "Yes. It's hard when the room is full but the heart feels empty." She gave a tight, polite smile and disappeared back through the door. I stayed seated, breath shallow. So this was it. They didn't just want me out of the photos. They wanted me out of the picture. A clean erasure before a new chapter. Before grandparenthood. Before family began to mean something else entirely. Something that didn't include me. But that clause. That forgotten line in a document Evan had never revoked. It wasn't just legal. It was symbolic. It reminded me that I had once been more than decoration. That I had been entrusted, believed in, that Evan, in a moment of vulnerability and love, had once declared in ink and signature. "I trust you, Mom. Always." A knock interrupted my thoughts. It was the server again. Mrs. Hale. "They're about to do the mother-son dance." I blinked. "Excuse me." He nodded. "They're announcing it now." My heart fluttered. Maybe Evan had remembered. Maybe this was the redemption arc. The softening. The apology. I stood slowly gathering my things, straightened my cardigan, and walked back toward the ballroom, hope quietly blooming in my chest. But when I stepped in, the room was already swaying. Evan was dancing with Clarissa's mother. The MC announced, "A tribute to the women who shaped their lives." And the applause thundered. My hands fell to my sides. Clarissa beamed. Her mother wiped away a delicate tear. No one looked for me. No one called my name. I was a page they had turned to, but they forgot. I still had the pen, and the next chapter would be mine. Before there was lace and gold ribbon, before the wedding hashtag, before Clarissa even knew how Evan took his coffee. There was me, and a promise sealed in documents she never thought to read. It happened on a rainy Monday years ago, the kind of day where the gray of the sky makes you question every decision you've made. Evan was fresh out of college, full of big ideas, and a half-packed suitcase for Europe. He didn't want to think about legal paperwork. He wanted to paint in Florence, drink wine in Paris, lose himself in museums and sketchbooks. But I had lived through James's death. I had learned the hard way that hope without paperwork is just a pretty story. So I made him sit at our kitchen table, ink pen in hand, and I said, "I don't want to control you. I want to protect you from what you don't see coming yet." He looked into my eyes, still soft, then still full of trust, and said, "I know, Mom. You've never asked for anything but my safety." That day we signed 3 documents: a power of attorney for medical and financial emergencies, a limited revocable trust to manage the Hale inheritance until he turned 35, and an addendum clause that would ensure any joint ventures over $250,000 marriage business real estate would require my co-signature if funded from the trust or family estate. At the time he said, "It's just in case I marry someone reckless." I laughed. "You mean someone you love too much to see clearly?" He smiled. "Exactly that." Clarissa was smart. I'll give her that. She built the wedding not just as a celebration, but as a brand. A way to solidify status, to merge wealth with charm, to present their union as flawless from every angle. But what she didn't know, what Evan forgot, is that the foundation she built it on wasn't hers. It was mine. You see, the Monroe Hale Wedding Trust had started as a scholarship fund. It was something James and I created for Evan's future family to educate their kids, to buy their first home. Clarissa's team of planners repurposed it, turned it into floral walls, imported chandeliers, and private chefs flown in from Napa, all signed under Evan's name, all funded from the trust, and all still under my shared authority. They must have assumed I'd been removed, that I was just a relic, a dusty photo in a locket kept for sentiment, not substance. But the truth is, no one ever asked me to step aside. No one ever filed a revocation. No one ever read the fine print. And fine print is where power sleeps. That week before the wedding, I got a call from a junior associate at Clarissa's father's firm. He was courteous, professional, and just slightly arrogant. "Mrs. Hale," he began, "we just need your signature on a couple of documents, formality really, just to finalize the reallocation of the Monroe Hale Trust toward event services." I paused. "Event services?" "Yes. The venue, media licensing, branded hashtags, etc. All very above board." "And what if I don't sign?" He hesitated. "Well then, there might be delays." It would reflect poorly. "But Clarissa mentioned you'd be supportive." That was the first time I realized. They'd already counted me out. I told him I'd think about it. Then I hung up and reread every word of those documents. Spent 2 nights revisiting legalese I hadn't touched in a decade. And what I found tucked into Section 4B, page 17, was a phrase no one expected to matter. "Any disbursement exceeding $100,000 for non-infrastructure events shall require the co-approval of both trustees." Me and Evan. They had spent $273,000 without my approval. The dress alone cost more than what I'd earned in my first 3 years of teaching. I could have stopped the wedding. I could have frozen the trust. But I didn't. Why? Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. And sometimes it lets people walk into their own illusions until they trip. So I let it happen. The lights. The cake. The dance I wasn't invited to. But every moment, every insult added weight to what I was building in silence. This wasn't just a wedding. It was evidence. And soon, there would be consequences. The reception had dwindled into a glittering haze of champagne flutes and slurred farewells. Clarissa still pristine in her second dress, a silk slip that shimmered like entitlement floated from table to table like a queen surveying her dominion. I sat quietly in the back corner, a ghost with a pulse hands folded neatly on my lap. No one noticed me, not even the photographer. But I noticed everything. The way Clarissa leaned into donors, not relatives. The way she laughed loud, strategic, polished. And the way she clutched Evan's arm like a social contract. Then she made her mistake. She stepped aside to speak with her father's lawyer, the same one who had called me weeks ago. Their tones were hushed, but I'd taught speech and drama for 30 years. I knew how to read lips. She didn't sign. What do you mean she didn't? Margaret Hale. She didn't return the final authorization. We can't file the full transfer until Monday. So, the wedding already happened. It's not just the wedding, Clarissa. It's the premarital clause in Section 4B. Without her signature, the disbursement remains conditional. Clarissa's smile didn't break, but I saw the twitch in her jaw. She's irrelevant. Evan said she'd never contest. The lawyer paused. But she hasn't signed. That was the clause she overlooked. You see, Clarissa believed in optics. In assumption, in the power of staging. But she never believed in paper. She thought ceremony was legality. She thought a ring meant ownership. She thought inheritance was just a matter of time. What she forgot was me, not the woman she snubbed at the rehearsal dinner, not the woman seated next to the restroom, but the woman who co-founded the very fund that paid for every monogrammed napkin and imported tulip in this charade. Let me be clear, I never wanted to ruin her day. But she ruined my years. She took my son's memory of me, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer labeled past. She told people Evan was self-made. She introduced me at the bridal shower as his mother, the retired teacher, as if my title were a footnote, not the foundation. She even told Evan I'd feel more comfortable in the back, that lighting wasn't flattering on older skin. But now, because she rushed a transaction, because she ignored a detail, because she didn't respect the one woman who knew how to wield fine print, she handed me a key. I didn't use it, not yet. Power. Real power isn't loud. It's patient. I went home that night, took off my shoes at the doorway like I always had, laid the worn leather folder on the dining table, and brewed a pot of black tea. Then I wrote an email not to Evan, but to the family lawyer, to the original trustee of the Hale Family Fund, to the estate office that had overseen James's assets for over 2 decades. Subject: regarding the conditional status of the Monroe-Hale transfer. Attachment: PDF, Power of Attorney Trust Clause, 4B non-signature. I knew what would happen next. Clarissa would return from her honeymoon. She would expect checks to clear. She would expect the Monroe name to open doors. She would expect leverage. But what she would receive was a letter stating, pending co-trustee approval, all disbursements beyond operating threshold are frozen until further notice. She would storm into Evan's office, accuse him of betrayal. He'd be confused at first, but then he'd remember, not me in the present, the woman left off the seating chart, but me from the past, the woman who packed his lunches with handwritten notes, who stayed up past midnight grading papers so he could go on field trips, who taught him the difference between justice and punishment. She overlooked a clause. She overlooked a mother. And that was the costliest error of her perfectly staged life. The email came on a Thursday, 10 days after the wedding, right as Clarissa was preparing for a Vogue feature shoot on the art of legacy weddings. She had just finished her blowout. The makeup artist was dusting shimmer across her collarbones. And Evan, dear, sweet Evan, was reading over a lease Clarissa had signed on a heritage estate in Westchester. Their new home. bought naturally under the Monroe Hale Trust. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced down. From Hale Family Estate Office. Subject: Notice of Trust Activity Suspension. File reference 01047 4B. He frowned, opened it, and froze. Dear Mr. Haley, this message serves as formal notification that disbursement activity tied to Trust File 01474 4B Monroe Hale Family Trust has been suspended pending trustee co-approval. As outlined in Clause 4B of the original fund documentation, any financial transactions exceeding the conditional threshold without dual trustee authorization are to be paused. Please note, the last unapproved activity dated 2 weeks ago, vendor invoice, Somerset Event Co., was flagged by internal review. For resumption of fund access, co-trustee Margaret Hale must provide explicit written consent. Regards, Hale and Mitchell Estate Legal Team. Clarissa Evans said slowly, holding the phone as if it were radioactive. Did you submit that final authorization from my mother? She blinked. What authorization? He looked again. His face paled. His voice dropped. You didn't get her to sign? Clarissa laughed, the kind of brittle, elegant laugh she used to end conversations. Oh, come on. She was barely present at the wedding. What difference could she possibly make? Evan stood. She's still co-trustee. Clarissa stiffened. That's absurd. She's retired. She's irrelevant. Evan didn't answer, just kept scrolling through the email. Until her written approval is received, all payments will remain frozen. He muttered almost to himself. She warned me. Back then, she said power should be protected by paper, not memory. I didn't even think about it. The photographer stepped in, ready for the first look shots on the balcony. Clarissa waved him off. No, give us a moment. She turned back to Evan. Are you seriously telling me that because your mother didn't sign something we're blocked? She didn't just not sign, he said quietly. She's enforcing her right to freeze it. She's not senile, Clarissa. She's not weak. She's smart. Smarter than all of us. Clarissa's voice sharpened. She was in the photos next to the restroom, Evan. He looked at her. Really looked at her. You told me she wanted that seat. I did it for optics. Did you do the budget for optics too? She hesitated. The silence between them stretched thin and dangerous. Clarissa crossed her arms. Fine. Then have her sign it now. Evan rubbed his forehead. She won't. Not after all that's happened. Clarissa's voice dropped. Then make her. But Evan already knew. There are things you can't force from a woman who has nothing left to lose, except a memory of being invisible. That night, Clarissa called me. It was the first time she'd dialed directly. I picked up after 2 rings. Margaret, she said, tone smooth as glass. I wanted to reach out personally. Clear the air. I said nothing. She continued. I think we may have had some misunderstandings during the wedding weekend. It was such a whirlwind. You know how these things go. Still, I waited. Then came the hook. I'd love for you to visit the new estate with us. Help design the reading room. I've always admired your taste. Evan says you used to curate the school library. There, it was her brand of charm. A velvet glove pulled slowly over a closed fist. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I replied, Clarissa, darling, thank you for the offer. But I don't design rooms in houses built on the erasure of my name. And I don't sign papers under duress. She paused. Well then, I guess we'll just wait this out. No, I said. You'll learn the value of what you overlooked. I ended the call, took a breath, and smiled, the first real one in weeks. It wasn't war, not yet, but it was the first quiet thunder. And the storm was still gathering. The envelope was thick cream-colored, embossed with the gold insignia of Hale and Mitchell Estates, the family's longtime legal custodians. It arrived on Clarissa's marble kitchen counter like a stone dropped in still water. The courier had asked for a signature. Clarissa gave it with a flick of her pen, barely glancing at the label, until she saw the name. To Mrs. Clarissa Monroe Hale, pending trustee recognition. Her hand froze. She slit the envelope open with a golden knife meant for caviar jars. What she found wasn't elegant. It was cold, precise, and final. Subject: Notification of breach of trust usage terms. Dear Mrs. Monroe Hale. This communication serves to formally notify you of a breach of operational terms under Trust 00147-4B, Monroe Hale Family Legacy Fund. It has come to our attention that you authorized and executed financial decisions exceeding the conditional limit set forth under Clause 4B without requisite dual trustee consent. Per the original trust charter, this is a material violation. As such, all scheduled payments, vendors, real estate transfers, promotional partnerships have been suspended. Title of the Westchester estate is now under provisional hold. All related media licensing contracts are temporarily invalidated. This freeze will remain in effect until co-trustee Margaret Hale provides signed approval or initiates amendment review. Sincerely, Charles D. Lowenstein, Senior Estate Counsel. Hale and Mitchell. Clarissa read it 3 times. Then she screamed. Not a dramatic gasp, not a soap opera wail. A guttural, furious cry from the center of her chest. Evan rushed in, barefoot, coffee in hand. What happened? She threw the letter at him like it was poison. They froze everything. Everything. The venue licensing, the photos, the articles, even the goddamn house. He read it in silence. Clarissa paced like a lioness denied her prey. She's doing this. That old woman. That ghost. She's trying to humiliate me. Evan didn't defend me, but he didn't argue either. That silence was Clarissa's real enemy now. Later that evening, she tried her second move. Public control. She posted a curated statement on her wedding account. We are currently adjusting a few post-wedding matters due to a clerical oversight. Nothing major, just boring paperwork. It's a reminder that even fairy tales have a little fine print. Stay tuned for honeymoon photos. But the comments weren't kind. Is this about the trust freeze people are whispering about? Was your mother-in-law really sitting next to the bathroom? Y'all flexed too hard and forgot the signatures. Clarissa began deleting, then disabling, then locking the account. Across town, I was sipping chamomile tea. The estate lawyer had sent me a copy of the letter at my request. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. The first official letter that didn't erase me, didn't overlook me, didn't treat me as a +1 to the past. It recognized me as the gatekeeper. The next day, my phone rang. It was Evan. Not Clarissa. Evan. His voice was quiet like it used to be when he got sick as a boy and didn't want me to worry. Mom. I didn't know. I forgot. I thought we removed your name years ago. I let the silence hang. I didn't mean to hurt you. Clarissa, she has strong ideas about legacy, about image. She didn't think you'd want to be involved. Still, I waited. Then he said, would you be willing to talk about lifting the freeze? Maybe just for the house. We're not in a good place right now. That's when I spoke. Softly, evenly. Evan, I gave you everything I had. I raised you alone. I paid for your school, your art trips, your first studio. I told you about this trust, I made you sign it. And still you let her seat me next to the restroom. I didn't know she did that. You didn't ask. I hung up gently. No yelling, no drama. Just distance and the echo of something neither of them had counted on. My memory and my precision. You see, this story wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. The lack of it. And now, the quiet legal insistence that it be restored. A week after Evan's call, a sleek black package arrived at my door. No note, no return label, just a glossy sticker that read, "The Monroe Hale Wedding, a legacy in photos." I knew what it was before opening it. I also knew instinctively what would be missing. Still, I opened it. The album was beautiful, bound in ivory linen with gold-embossed edges. The first page read, 2 families, 1 story, a forever union. I turned the pages slowly. Clarissa in her custom gown, veil billowing. Evan standing beneath cherry blossoms, smiling nervously. Their first dance, their vows. Clarissa's parents beaming. Her grandmother lighting the family candle. Even their Yorkshire Terrier in a floral collar. But nowhere, not a single frame was I. Not in the family shots. Not in the guest groupings. Not even in the wide-angle photos of the crowd. I was erased. I reached the last page. A quote printed in soft cursive. Family is not just who we are born to, but who we celebrate with. A cruel line, not because it wasn't true, but because it was weaponized to exclude. And then, at the very back of the box, I saw it. A small matte envelope labeled, "Unused selects not for print." My hands trembled a little. I pulled out the photo inside. It was of me and Evan, not posed. Candid. He had just finished adjusting his tie. I was brushing lint from his lapel, my fingers gentle. He was smiling down at me, not the broad smile he wore for Clarissa, but something softer, more familiar. It was love. Real, quiet, undeniable. The kind of love no planner could choreograph. On the back in fine print was a note. Removed due to lighting inconsistencies and background distractions. Kitchen staff visible. I laughed. A brittle sound. Lighting inconsistencies. That was me now. Too dim. Too distracting. Unfit for the fairy tale. I slipped the photo back into the envelope, slid it into my purse, and took a walk. I didn't know where I was going, until I found myself in front of Evan's office building. I stood on the other side of the street, just looking at the life he had built, the glass facade, the clean logos, the air of efficiency, so different from the cluttered warmth of the home I once held together with tape and whispered lullabies. Inside, I imagined him sitting at his desk, probably still wondering how to convince me to sign, still thinking of me as an obstacle, not a foundation. He didn't know about the photo. Didn't know that one image tucked away held the truth he'd forgotten. That night, I scanned the picture, sent it to him with one line, "Lighting inconsistency or memory you chose not to print." He replied 3 hours later, "Mom, I didn't see this." Clarissa handled the album. No apology, just deflection. "I love that photo," I replied, "but you loved it quietly," and printed the lie. A few days passed. Then one morning, I received another email from the same estate lawyer who had frozen the trust. Subject: amendment request. Trustee structure negotiation. Attached was a draft proposal. Evan wanted to restructure the trust. He was offering to make me a ceremonial trustee, no more dual signatures required. He said it would be simpler. I read it once, then again, and I smiled. Because the more they tried to remove me, the more visible I became. You see, they thought erasing me from pictures would remove me from the story. But they forgot something. I kept the negatives, and negatives develop. I didn't respond to Evan's proposal. Not immediately. Instead, I sat with it, watched it simmer beside the photo. Clarissa discarded the letter that froze her account, the envelope that made her hands shake. And then I did something no lawyer expected. I went to the attic. The attic wasn't much. Just a low-ceilinged space above the garage filled with dust mothballs and the smell of stories that were never properly told. Inside, Evan's baby blanket, my old lesson plans, a box of letters from James before he left, a photo album no one asked to see. But to me it was a cathedral, because this was the real inheritance. One photo in particular stopped me. Evan, age 7, standing beside a lemonade stand we built together. Handwritten sign. Plastic cups, 50 cents each. He was smiling that same crooked grin he wore at the wedding, the one Clarissa thought she created. Behind him, me. Tired eyes. Flour on my apron. Holding the ledger book. Even then, I kept the books. I took that photo, placed it in an envelope, and wrote, "There was a time when legacy meant sweat, not shares." I mailed it to Evan. No signature, no return address, but I knew he'd know. 2 days later, he called again. "You sent me a picture of lemonade." I waited. "I remember that day. You made me sell the pitcher before I could drink any." I smiled. "He who earns first drinks second." That was the rule. He was quiet for a while. "Mom, Clarissa doesn't understand all this. She thinks legacy is clean, corporate." "She's not wrong," I said. "But inheritance is messy. It stains your hands, like sugar water on paper. So what do you want, really?" And that's when I knew. He still thought I was negotiating, still thought I was holding out for more. So I told him, "I want a table, one where I'm not next to the restroom, one where I don't have to ask to speak, one where my name isn't an asterisk at the bottom of a trust." He didn't speak. And I didn't fill the silence. Later that evening, I began writing. Not emails, not legal clauses, but stories. Real ones. I began with the house at Marigold Street, the place Evan took his first steps. Then, the winter we burned coupons for heat. Then, the man who left, and the woman who stayed. Each story was raw, unfiltered, sometimes unflattering. But they were ours, not curated for photo albums, not shaped for Instagram likes, but stitched together from real moments, the ones they tried to forget. I compiled them into a manuscript, bound them with twine, and titled it, What They Don't Print on Wedding Invitations. Then I called my publisher friend, an old student of mine who now edited memoirs. She cried after reading the first 10 pages. This isn't just personal, she said. It's generational restoration. Clarissa thought she married into wealth, into power, into silence. But what she really married into was a story too loud to be erased. And I was done whispering. Weeks later, I got an invitation. Not from Evan, from a bookstore. They wanted to host a reading, promote the book, and the date. 1 year exactly from the wedding. A poetic symmetry I didn't plan, but wholly embraced. I didn't respond to Evan's last email, the one where he asked if I'd finally signed the amendment. Instead, I mailed him a galley copy of my manuscript. On the first page, I wrote, Inheritance is not what you leave in bank accounts. It's what they say about you when the guests go home. The bookstore smelled like paper and roasted coffee beans. It was a cozy corner store tucked between a florist and a law firm. Poetic, I thought, considering how this story was both soft petals and binding contracts. I arrived 15 minutes early, not out of nervousness, but out of habit. Mothers who raise sons alone learn never to be late. Someone always needs us first. The manager greeted me with a warm smile. We sold out the RSVP list, Emma's. Hele. Standing room only. She guided me through the narrow aisles to the reading room. There, 50 chairs were arranged in neat rows, each with a small card tucked into the back labeled, Reserved, for those who've ever been asked to sit out of the photo. My suggestion, my quiet tribute. I placed my manuscript on the wooden podium. No microphone needed. This wasn't a rally. It was a reckoning. A quiet one. As the guests began to trickle in, I noticed familiar faces. The old neighbor who used to slip casseroles under my door. A former student who now taught literature to girls like Clarissa. The florist who helped me arrange wildflowers the day Evan turned 10. They came with no bouquets, only attention and warmth. But 2 chairs in the front row stayed empty. I had labeled them with no names, just silence. They were meant for Evan and Clarissa. I didn't expect them, but I saved them. Because forgiveness, like storytelling, is not conditional. It is offered, not begged for. I began reading. First, a passage from The Winter We Burned Coupons for Heat. He was 7. I was out of work, and the heating oil ran out 2 days before the check came. So we bundled under old quilts, and I told him stories about emperors who lived in ice palaces. He thought it was magical. I thought it was survival. A few sniffles echoed in the room. Not pity. Recognition. I continued. A chapter about Evan's first art competition. How he cried when he didn't win. How I stayed up all night drawing another poster with him, just so he'd feel like his ideas mattered. How he forgot eventually. But I didn't, because mothers don't forget the nights we hold their doubt with both hands and pretend we're sure, even when we're not. After 40 minutes, I closed the book. The room clapped, not thunderously, but respectfully, like a chapel after the last hymn. People lined up to shake my hand, to say, Thank you for writing us into your pages. But the 2 chairs stayed empty, still, unclaimed. That night, I walked home alone, carried only my purse and 1 signed copy of the book. I stopped in front of Evan's building, looked up at the lit windows, then placed the book at the front door beneath the brass mailbox. Inside, I tucked a note. I left you 2 seats. Maybe next time you'll sit in one. 2 days later, I got a message. Not from Evan. From his assistant. Mr. Hale wishes to congratulate you on the success of your memoir. He regrets missing the event due to prior engagements. I stared at the screen, and then deleted the message. No anger. No heartbreak. Just closure. Because when someone refuses to witness your story, they lose the right to narrate it. Later that week, an article appeared in the Sunday Arts section. One Mother's Quiet Revolution. Margaret Hale redefines legacy. With sentences like scalpels and pages like prayer, Margaret Hale's memoir is a gentle upheaval of what it means to be family. In a world of curated perfection, she offers something rare: truth with teeth. This isn't a book about revenge. It's about returning to your rightful seat even when no one leaves it for you. And just like that, I was no longer the woman next to the restroom. I was the woman with a microphone, with a voice, with her own chapter, and 2 empty chairs that said more than any applause ever could. It was 9:42 p.m. on a Wednesday. I had just brewed chamomile tea when the phone rang. Not the landline. My cell, a number I hadn't saved. But I knew it. You don't carry a child for 9 months, raise him for 27 years, and not recognize the rhythm of his presence even in silence. I let it ring twice, then picked up. Hello. There was a pause, then a breath. Hi, Mom. Just that. No preamble, no request, no legal tone, just Mom. I said nothing, not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to shatter the moment too soon. Sometimes silence is the safest place for a heart to land. Then he spoke again. I saw the article, the one in the Times. Yeah, the one that said you have teeth. I laughed. They're mostly crowns now, but still sharp. He chuckled softly, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard since he was a teenager pretending not to cry during Pixar movies. I read the whole book, you know, even the parts that made you the villain. Especially those. Another pause. It wasn't flattering. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be true. He nodded, I could tell. Then he said something unexpected. You wrote me like a son worth saving. You were, even when I forgot you. Especially then. Silence again. Then a question, one I never expected from him. Do you remember the last time I made you tea? I blinked. It had been years. Evan was 14. I had pneumonia. He tried to boil water and dropped the kettle. Panicked. Apologized 1,000 times. But I drank the lukewarm tea anyway, told him it was perfect. You were wearing that ridiculous Garfield apron, I said. He laughed. God, I forgot about that thing. I didn't. It's in the attic. With everything else you left behind. There was a long pause. Then Evan spoke softer than before. I'm sorry, Mom. For the wedding? For more than that. Be specific. He inhaled sharply. For letting someone else decide where you sat. For treating your silence like permission. For thinking money was the only language legacy spoke. I said nothing for a moment. Then, apology accepted. But I didn't say it's okay. Because it wasn't. Not all of it. And forgiveness isn't the same as erasure. He asked, do you still have that photo? The one Clarissa cut from the album. Yes. Can I have a copy? Why? Because I want to remember who I was. Before I let her edit me, I walked over to the drawer, pulled out the envelope. The photo was still there. Not creased, not forgotten. Just waiting. I'll send it tomorrow. Thanks, Mom. He was about to hang up, but I stopped him. Evan. Yeah. Don't let this call be the chapter before the silence again. It won't. Promise. I swear. And then quietly. Mom, when's your birthday again? I smiled. June 17th. We missed it, didn't we? You were at a wedding. Yours matters more. That's new. That's growth. We both laughed. After the call, I didn't cry. I didn't rush to tell anyone. I just sat on the couch. Tea-forgotten phone, warm in my hand, like the memory of a hug long overdue. Because that call wasn't about documents, accounts, or damage control. It was about coming home. And sometimes the most valuable inheritance is someone remembering how to say your name without shame. The package arrived in a plain manila envelope. No logo, no ribbon, just my handwriting and a return address scratched into the corner. Inside was the photo Clarissa had cut from the wedding album, the one where I was standing next to Evan, half smiling, holding a plate of hors d'oeuvres, while everyone else toasted with champagne. It wasn't glamorous. My cardigan was wrinkled. My shoes were flat. My makeup had smudged slightly from tears I refused to let fall. But my hand was on Evan's shoulder, and he hadn't flinched. That to me was everything. I didn't include a letter this time. No need to explain what he already remembered. No need to put feelings into paragraphs he now seemed ready to feel for himself. I just mailed the photo and waited. 3 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo, a desk, Evan's, next to his dual monitor setup and a sleek black nameplate that read, Even Hale. Managing director sat a small picture frame. Inside it, the photo I sent, not cropped, not captioned, just whole. Below it, he had placed a sticky note in his own handwriting. She was always there. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because some messages deserve only stillness in return, the kind of silence that reverberates louder than applause. Later that week, Clarissa called. Not from her number. From a blocked one. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short. I didn't know he'd frame it. I didn't expect it to be on his desk. I just wanted you to know. You won. I played the message twice, then deleted it. Because it wasn't about winning. It was never a game. This was about returning. To a rightful place. To a story left unfinished. A week later, Evan called again. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember that article I had to write in 6th grade? About my hero. You said it was your math teacher. I lied. Oh, it was you. But I was embarrassed to say it. The other kids picked athletes. Presidents. I picked the woman who made instant noodles taste like holidays. I laughed. And then I cried. Quietly. Because I remembered that paper. I'd found it once years ago. Stuffed between old bills and forgotten mail. It started with, My mom is the smartest person I know. She makes money feel like magic. And ended with, One day I want to buy her a castle. You don't need to buy me a castle, I told him. I know, he said. But I still might. Just smaller. Maybe with good plumbing? Weeks passed. And I visited his office. Unannounced. Clarissa wasn't there. His assistant greeted me, led me in, and there it was. The photo. On his desk, right beneath the window, sunlight hitting it like a soft spotlight. Next to it, a cup of tea, chamomile, warm, waiting. He looked up from his screen, smiled. I ordered lunch. Let me guess, I said. Lemonade and burnt toast. Only the finest cuisine. And then he did something I hadn't expected since he turned 12. He stood, walked around the desk, and hugged me. Not a quick, embarrassed squeeze, but a long, intentional two-armed embrace. A full circle, a silent apology, a framed truth. Because sometimes healing doesn't come in courtrooms, or emails, or estate revisions. Sometimes it sits on a desk, where everyone can see it, and no one can unframe it. The annual Hale Group Investor Conference was always the same. Polished stage, muted suits, buzzwords like scalability, quarterly growth, and risk minimization. But this year, something was different. For one, I was there, invited, by name, with front row seating, not next to the restrooms, not behind a column, but centered like punctuation in a sentence long denied. As the lights dimmed and the MC welcomed everyone, Evan took the stage. Tailored navy suit, confidence in stride, but his hands trembled just slightly, the way they used to when he'd hold a report card behind his back. He stepped up to the podium, then paused. Before we begin, I want to do something a little different. A flicker of curiosity rippled through the room. He picked up a folded piece of paper, old, uncreased, worn like something carried, often rarely shown. This is an excerpt from a book most of you haven't read yet. It's by Margaret Hale. People glanced around. Some recognized my name. Most didn't, but all went silent. Then Evan began to read. Legacy is not an asset locked in a vault, nor is it a name etched in marble. It is what we choose to pass on, when no one is watching. It's how we show up for people who stopped expecting us. Legacy is a table set without expectation, and a seat offered not earned. A pin could have dropped. No one moved. He looked up, eyes full, voice clear. For years, I thought legacy was built in boardrooms, but my mother built hers in kitchens, waiting rooms, and rainstorms. This year, we doubled revenue, but more importantly, I remembered where I came from. He folded the page. No applause yet, just breath held. Then, Margaret Hale is here today. He looked directly at me, and she taught me that before you write your will, write your truth. The applause came slow, then thunderous. Not because they understood, but because they felt something shift, and that's always where true change begins. After the speech, investors approached me. That passage, it hit home. I wish my father had said something like that. Is your book available? When is the second one coming out? I smiled, signed a few copies I'd brought, took photos I never expected to take. But what mattered most? Evan didn't leave my side. Not once. Later that evening, we sat at a small bistro downtown. No cameras, no stage lights, just mother and son. Why did you choose that passage? I asked. Because it was the one I avoided the longest. Why? Because it made me remember how far I strayed. I placed my hand on his. You came back. He nodded. And this time I'm staying. That night I dreamed not of vaults or bank accounts, but of voices, laughter echoing in kitchens, songs hummed over laundry, stories whispered to children who don't yet understand their weight. And I realized, maybe that's where legacy truly lives, not in what we leave behind, but in how we're remembered out loud. After the conference, as the crowd began to scatter, handshakes turning into brief goodbyes, business cards being exchanged like ritual confessions, I stayed seated. There's a certain silence that only comes after applause. It doesn't ring like triumph. It breathes like aftershock. Evan had stepped away briefly to speak with a journalist. I remained near the stage, fingers gently tracing the edge of my program booklet, watching people pass. Then she appeared, a woman maybe early 70s, short gray curls, a thick wool scarf wrapped tightly around her shoulders, though the room was warm. She walked slowly, deliberately, and stopped right in front of me. You're Margaret Hale. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Her voice was firm yet tender. I read your piece in Voices of the Unspoken magazine. The one about making dignity from discount soup. Oh, I blinked. That essay was published years ago. A quiet, anonymous piece I'd barely shared even with friends. She sat down beside me. I cut it out, taped it to the inside of my pantry. For the days my children forgot my birthday. For the nights I ate alone while they posted family dinners online. Her voice didn't crack, but her eyes held years of restrained flood. You reminded me that invisible doesn't mean imaginary. That being forgotten doesn't mean we didn't love loud enough. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever quoted my own words back to me like scripture. You made it feel less like failure, more like a quiet kind of victory. I finally found my breath. What's your name? I asked. She smiled softly. Everyone calls me Dot, but I used to be called Mama, then Ma, then nothing at all. She laughed, but it was hollow, not bitter, just tired. But you, Margaret, you gave me back a name I thought I'd lost. Not mom or mother, but human. Two. We sat there, two women from different kitchens, different years, but the same ache. She reached into her worn purse and handed me a folded slip of paper. I started writing again. Because of you. Only a few poems. But I thought maybe you'd want this. I unfolded it. It read, a chair without my name, a room without my light. But still I sit, because the sun does not ask for permission to rise. I swallowed, then stood, and hugged her. Not because she looked fragile, but because something inside me had just been stitched. Later that evening, Evan and I walked through the quiet city. The streets shimmered from a light rain. Steam rose from subway grates. Everything looked softer, like a city exhaling after too long holding its breath. Who was that woman? Evan asked. Dot, I said. She remembers who I was before anyone else forgot. He looked puzzled. What do you mean? I wrote in silence for so long, Evan. Scribbled in journals between jobs. Typed essays no one published. But somehow she found them. And now, I stopped walking. Now I think, I didn't just write for me. I wrote for all the women sitting next to the restrooms at weddings. All the mothers who carried legacies in aprons and raincoats. Who held up generations while being told they were holding everyone back. Evan didn't respond right away, but his arm looped through mine, tighter than before. When we reached the crosswalk, I turned to him. Evan, legacy is not just what you leave in vaults or speeches. It's what you whisper that someone else hears, and then decides to whisper too. Dot whispered back. 3 nights later, I received a phone call. It was 10:47 p.m., late enough that I almost didn't answer. Hello, I said, unsure. Margaret Hale. Yes. The voice was soft, deliberate, the kind that makes you straighten your spine without knowing why. This is Claire Freeman. I'm a producer at Midnight Echo, the late-night radio show on WLRN. We air stories, real ones. The kind people carry in silence until someone else dares to say them out loud. I stayed quiet. We received a submission this morning, a poem, from someone named Dot. My heart paused. She said it was inspired by you. She gave your name and said if possible, you should hear what she had to say. I sank into the armchair near the window. The wind outside moved like breath through thin trees. Claire continued, "We aired the poem 30 minutes ago, and something's happening. We've received over 300 messages from mothers, grandmothers, daughters, even grown sons." One woman in Ohio said, "I turned off the oven to listen. My mother passed last year, but tonight she spoke again through this poem." Another said, "I haven't talked to my mom in 6 years. I just called her. Would you like to hear the clip?" She didn't wait for my yes. The static buzzed. Then Dot's voice. "A chair without my name. A room without my light. But still I sit, because the sun does not ask for permission to rise. I was once a name whispered before dinner. Now I'm the hum beneath their silence. Yet I remain not to haunt, but to remind them what stood still, while they all moved on." There was a long, deliberate pause. Then Claire's voice returned. "That aired at 10. By 10:15 we were trending." I sat frozen, not from shock, but from a strange kind of release, like something I had carried for decades had finally let go of me, or maybe I'd let go of it. Claire continued, "Miss Hale, we'd like to invite you onto the show tomorrow night, not to explain, not to defend, just to read anything you've written, or anything you wish you had." I didn't answer right away. Then I asked, "Can I bring Dot?" She chuckled. "Please do. Bring all the voices that were once told to lower theirs." The next night, Dot and I sat in a tiny studio lined with soundproof foam and dim yellow lamps. The kind of space that felt more like confession than performance. Claire gave us tea. A producer adjusted our mics. And then the on-air sign glowed red. Claire spoke first. "Tonight we continue a story that isn't just one woman's. It belongs to anyone who's ever felt like background noise at their own celebration. Anyone who's ever sacrificed themselves into silence. With us are 2 women who decided to speak. Margaret Hale, Dot Summers, and the words that refuse to stay quiet." I read a piece called The Guest List, about all the women never invited to weddings, to decision tables, to the inheritance conversation, and how they still showed up anyway, carrying generations inside them. And casseroles no one asked for, but everyone ate. Dot read another poem, this one called Receipt. She kept the receipt, not for the shoes, but for the apology she never got. When the broadcast ended, we didn't say much, but we knew something had moved. Not viral, not loud, but like roots splitting soil underfoot, quiet, deep, and unstoppable. That weekend, Evan sent me a photo, a whiteboard in his company's break room. At the top, someone had written in bold marker, "Who's the Margaret Hale in your life?" Below it were sticky notes, dozens, names, stories, messages like, "My grandmother raised me while working night shifts. My aunt gave up college so my dad could go. My mother never let us know how poor we were. I never said thank you." I stared at the image until my screen dimmed from inactivity. Then I whispered to the room, "I hear you?" After the radio broadcast, I felt a strange calm. Not the kind that comes from resolution, but the kind that comes when you stop asking for applause. Evan called the next morning. "Mom," he said, "I know you've probably got requests flooding in now. Interviews, readings, speeches. But I was thinking, could we go back to the old house this weekend?" I didn't answer immediately. I knew what he meant. The house on Lindell Street, where he grew up. Where I grew up again as a mother, and then faded slowly into the wallpaper. "I'd like that," I replied softly. "Let me bring something with me." Saturday morning, the autumn sky had that particular stillness, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath with you. We drove in silence most of the way. Evan had a paper bag with pastries on the back seat. I carried a small leather notebook in my lap, my writing journal from the years no one asked if I still dreamed. The house was still there. The shutters now faded. The porch light bent at an odd angle. But the window shelf, that narrow ledge beneath the kitchen window, still held its shape. Once upon a time, I placed notes there. Quotes. Lines I scribbled on receipts or napkins. None of them important. None of them noticed. But that shelf had been my quiet rebellion. My whisper to the universe that I still had a voice, even if it only echoed in the dust. Evan unlocked the front door. Everything smelled of memory, not quite warmth, not quite dust, something in between. He wandered toward the living room. I drifted to the kitchen, and there it was, the window shelf, still holding something. I reached out gently, brushing the surface. There were faint imprints, yellowed tape marks, a small ink smudge, and one note, old but legible, had somehow survived. It read, "One day they'll say, she kept the house quiet." But what they meant was, she kept the house alive. I smiled, then turned, and found Evan standing silently behind me. He held up his phone. "Can I take a picture?" I nodded. He snapped a photo of me beside the shelf, then one of the note. Then, without saying a word, he pulled a marker from his coat pocket and added his own line on a fresh slip of paper. He placed it gently beside mine. "She raised a home without needing a headline." We stood there, 2 generations, and one shelf that had heard everything no one else had. Before we left, I tucked my notebook beside the notes, not to leave it behind, but to let the house hold it for a while. A kind of tribute, a kind of release. That night, Evan posted the photo online. No hashtags, no long captions. Just, "Not all heroes sit at the front. Some write their legacy into window ledges." By morning, the post had gone viral. Thousands of comments, hundreds of shared stories. People photographing their own window shelves, places where forgotten mothers, aunts, grandmothers had scribbled thoughts and taped them near sinks, under calendars, behind pantry doors. A movement had begun, not of revolution, but of remembering. I received a message from a woman in Australia. My mum left sticky notes in her sewing drawer. I never read them till she passed. "I read your story and went back. I found a poem. It said, 'Even when you outgrow my lap, I will still hold your world.'" Yeah. Another wrote, "Thank you for showing us that we don't need a podium to leave a legacy. Sometimes we just need a windowsill and a pen." The shelf had become a shrine, not just in my home, but in the hearts of women everywhere who'd been told they were background, when really they were foundation. 3 weeks after the window shelf story went viral, I received an invitation, not to a party, not to a radio show, to a ceremony. A local women's foundation had picked up the story, not just mine, but what it sparked. Thousands of messages from across the country, from caregivers, grandmothers, estranged mothers, and overlooked matriarchs. They titled the event, "Unsung Legacies, a Night of Stories That Built Us." I was asked to be the closing speaker. I hesitated at first. The thought of standing in front of strangers reading words I once whispered into empty kitchens, it felt too big, too exposed. But then I remembered, I had already lived through invisibility. What was vulnerability compared to silence? The night of the event, I arrived with Dot. Evan met us at the door, dressed in a deep navy suit. He looked both proud and nervous, the way he did as a boy during school recitals. "Mom," he whispered, "your seat's right up front, second from the podium." He handed me a folded program. There it was. Closing speaker Margaret Hale. I walked into the hall. Hundreds of chairs filled the space, all facing a softly lit stage. I looked around instinctively, searching for the one next to the restroom. There wasn't one. Every seat had been placed with intention, every row equidistant from the stage, every light cast evenly, no shadows, no sidelines, no quiet corners where someone could be forgotten. Dot nudged me. "You ready to own the mic?" I smiled, not from ego, but from arrival. When it was my turn, I walked slowly to the podium. No papers, just memory. "My name is Margaret Hale. You may have heard my story." A chair near the restroom. A wedding photo I wasn't allowed to be in. A lifetime of being background. But tonight, I'd like to talk about what happens after they seat you there. I paused. The room leaned in. You learn how to make silence loud. You learn that dignity doesn't need permission. And you learn that sometimes the stories that never made the album were the ones holding the whole thing together. I was once told not to ruin a picture, but the truth is, I was the frame. I was the lens. I was the one who taught the man in that picture how to walk, how to speak, how to stand. And yet I was asked to sit down. So tonight, let me say this to every woman ever seated in the shadows: get back up, write your words, read them aloud, build your shelf, find your dot, and don't wait for the front row to be offered. Claim it. The applause didn't come all at once. It swelled slowly like something rising from deep inside the room. When I stepped down, the first person to hug me was Evan. "I'm sorry it took the world to see what I should have seen first," he whispered. I held his hand tightly. "The world didn't see me first. Evan, you did. When you were 6? When you brought me dandelions from the backyard and called them sun gifts. Ah, you just forgot for a little while. I never stopped holding space for you to remember." That night, as we left the building, I looked back at the hall one last time. The lights dimmed. The chairs were empty now, except one. Front row, still facing the podium. Evan turned to me. "That one's for you," he said. "Always." If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who never asked for thanks but deserved everything, follow our channel, because there are thousands of Margarets still seated in the background, and their stories need to be told. Subscribe for them, and for the ones still waiting to be seen.